All right, let's dive into Taoism today, a world that's both ancient and, surprisingly relevant.
Mm.
And because our listeners are philosophers, we're going to go deep.
Yes.
And we're using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as our guide today.
Great source.
Buckle up, though, because Taoism, it's not just like a set of beliefs.
Right.
It's a whole different way of thinking about the world and language and
Everything.
yeah, the idea of like guidance even itself.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is, like how it emerged in response to these other philosophical schools, particularly Confucianism.
Yeah.
Imagine ancient China, where Confucianism, with its emphasis on social order and rules,
All of the rules.
was really the dominant force, and Taoism kind of popped up as this countercurrent,
Yeah.
questioning those rigid structures.
Taoism is like, hey, there's more in life than just following the rule book, right?
Mm-hmm.
I find it really interesting, though, that even defining Taoism is a challenge.
Yeah.
Like the Stanford Encyclopedia even calls it out.
Oh,
It's like trying to nail down smoke.
Exactly. And that slippery nature comes from its long and winding history. In China,
Okay.
it evolved over centuries, and I think you'll see this constant tension between philosophical Taoism, which is very focused on this idea of Tao meaning way,
Right.
and religious Taoism with its rituals and practices.
Yeah, so we're not going to be talking about
We're sticking to the philosophical side.
religious Taoism. Okay.
Yeah, especially the parts that'll make you, as a philosopher, really think.
Yeah, the meta-ethical dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so before we get too far, I think we have to kind of unpack Tao itself
Yes.
because it's really easy to get lost in the weeds here.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing that Taoists break it down into 3 levels.
Yeah.
Human Tao, natural Tao, and this grand, great Tao.
Right.
But to be honest, these layers, they're kind of making my head spin a little bit.
Yeah, think of it this way. Imagine a recipe, right?
Okay.
That's human Tao. It's your way of doing things in the human world,
Okay.
a set of instructions. Then zoom out, think about the laws of physics, like gravity.
Yeah.
That's like natural Tao, often called Nian Tao.
Okay.
It governs how the universe operates at this fundamental level.
So where does great Tao fit into all of this?
Yeah.
Is it just like a super, sized version of natural Tao?
Not quite. Great Tao is like all-encompassing reality. Think the entire history of the universe, past, present, future.
Wow.
Everything that's happened, is happening, will happen, all rolled into one.
So it's like the ultimate cosmic dance.
Exactly.
Okay, so then we run smack into that famous first line of the Dou De Jing. The Tao that can be Taoed is not the constant Tao.
Yeah,
That's kind of a head-scratcher,
absolutely.
especially for a philosopher.
It is. It's a paradox that's meant to make you think, and I think it gets to this core Taoist idea, this inherent skepticism towards fixed principles, any attempt to perfectly define or capture the ultimate Tao in words.
So if we can't fully express it, how do we even begin to grasp it? Where do we even start?
It's not about finding the answer. It's about exploring the questions.
Okay.
I think to understand where Taoism is coming from, we need to look at the philosophers who kind of laid the groundwork.
Okay.
Think of figures like Yang Zhu, who, advocated for a radical form of ethical egoism. The idea that acting in your own self-interest is the most ethical path.
Whoa. Ethical egoism, that's a big claim.
Yeah.
That seems to go against the grain of so much ethical thought,
Exactly.
especially in the West.
And that's what's so interesting about Taoism. It challenges us to kind of look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And then you have someone like Song Jing who emphasized minimizing desires that are shaped by social norms.
Cool.
So they were both part of this, we can call it proto-Taoist current, suspicious of authority and rules, yearning for this more natural, spontaneous way of being.
So is this idea that maybe the way that we've been conditioned to think about the world, good and bad, right and wrong, isn't the only way or even the best way?
You're catching on. And that brings us to another important figure, Shen Dao.
Okay.
Now, he wasn't strictly a Taoist, but his ideas were hugely influential on Taoism,
Okay.
particularly its unique view of nature and how we should act within it.
All right. So Shen Dao, lay it on me. What kind of groundwork did he lay for Taoism?
He had this radical concept of great Tao.
Okay.
Remember that cosmic dance we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, for Shen Dao, that is great Tao. The totality of everything that happens, past, present, future.
All of it.
All of it.
So if we're all just caught up in this grand cosmic dance, what does that mean for our understanding of ethics and morality?
That's where it gets really interesting because we can't escape great Tao, Shen Dao argues that striving for a specific moral path is pointless.
Wait, hold on. But then he
Yeah.
goes on to tell us to abandon knowledge.
Right?
Isn't that a contradiction? Isn't
Yeah.
that statement itself like a form of knowledge?
You've hit on a key philosophical tension in Taoism.
Yeah.
This advice to abandon knowledge creates a fascinating paradox. It's this knot that Taoist thought keeps trying to untangle. How do we talk about abandoning knowledge without using knowledge to do so?
It's like a philosophical Mobius strip.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it leads us right into the Daoism, this text that so many people consider the heart of Taoist thought.
Yes.
It's attributed to, the mysterious Lao Tzu,
Mm.
and it dives deep into the power of language.
Yeah, the Tao Ching is a goldmine for a philosopher, and it suggests that words create distinctions, and those distinctions become the foundation of our desires, often leading to unnecessary conflict.
Okay.
Think about it. Words categorize, they label, they divide the world up, and I think that very active division can be problematic.
So it's like by naming things, we actually contribute to the problems that we see in the world.
Right?
It's like we're trying to impose order on a reality that might resist that kind of neat categorization.
Right, and that's where the Tao Jing's strategy of reversal comes in. It encourages us to value what's typically seen as negative. Non-being over being, weakness over strength, the lower position over the higher one. It's about turning our assumptions upside down.
I love this idea of reversal.
Yeah.
It's like the classic line, the obstacle is the path.
Mm-hmm.
By embracing what we typically reject, we might actually find a way forward.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that translate into action? Or should I say non-action?
Right.
Because the Tao Te Ching also introduces the concept of wu wei, right?
Ah, wu wei, the concept that trips up so many people.
Yes.
It's often mistranslated as inaction, but that's such an oversimplification.
Okay.
It's not about sitting on a mountaintop doing nothing.
Okay, we're going to need you to unpack that a little bit more, because if it's not in action, what is it?
Think of it as aligning yourself with the natural flow of the Tao.
Okay.
It's about acting in a way that's effortless and spontaneous, like a dancer who becomes one with the music.
So more about effortless action, being so in tune with that natural order that your actions kind of flow effortlessly from that state of alignment.
Exactly. And what's remarkable is how relevant this critique of social conditioning remains even today.
Mm-hmm.
We're bombarded with messages about what we want, how to think, who to be.
Yeah.
Taoism is kind of inviting us to step back from all that noise.
Yeah, find your own path. It's like Taoism is offering an antidote to the anxieties of modern life. It's reminding us that there's another way of being in the world.
Yes.
But we can't talk about Taoism and language without bringing in Hui Shi and the School of Names. They were really pushing the boundaries of language and logic in a way that feels so modern.
Yeah, Hui Shi was a master of paradox and wordplay.
Yeah.
And I think his arguments still resonate with philosophers today. He argued that our words don't perfectly map onto an objective reality.
Okay.
Take words like large and small.
Okay.
They're relative to our perspective.
Yeah, small elephant is huge compared to an ant.
Exactly.
Right.
So he's saying that our language is always limited. It can never fully encapsulate the complexities of reality.
Yeah, so he's like prefiguring some of the ideas we see in like post-structuralism and deconstruction.
Yeah.
This notion that language isn't a neutral tool, but rather a force that shapes our understanding.
Spot on. Hui Shi was centuries ahead of his time in many ways.
Wow.
And I think his ideas have a direct line to another key Taoist thinker, Zhuangzi, who we'll dive into more deeply next time.
Zhuangzi, the master storyteller, weaver of philosophical tale.
Exactly.
I'm ready for more.
All right. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Taoism.
Before we went down that rabbit hole of language and reality with Hui Shi, we were talking about this textual history of Taoism, particularly the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi. And as someone who loves a good philosophical mystery,
Right.
I'm really intrigued by the fact that, these texts weren't written by single authors.
Right.
It makes them feel even more alive to me. Like they're a product of a conversation that's been unfolding for centuries. But if it wasn't just Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, who else was contributing to these texts?
It's a bit like playing historical detective, trying to piece together fragments of information from different sources.
Right.
But what we can say with some certainty is that both the Tao Jing and the Zhuangzi were shaped by communities of thinkers, groups who shared these Taoist ideas, and kind of added to this evolving conversation.
So imagine these ancient philosophical salons with groups of Taoists debating, refining their arguments, adding their own insights to these texts over time.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder how many different voices and perspectives are kind of woven into these writings.
It's a philosophical chorus, not a solo performance.
Exactly.
And that's what makes studying these texts so rewarding. It's not about finding like the one right interpretation.
Right.
But it's about appreciating the richness and the diversity of thought within this Taoist tradition.
So it's a reminder that philosophy is a living, breathing thing. Not like this set of static doctrines. All right, so let's try to untangle some of these threads. When it comes to the Daoism, what do we know about the community that might have shaped it?
One prominent theory links the Tao Te Ching to a school of thought known as Huanglao.
Okay.
And this school was popular during the Qin and early Han dynasties.
Okay.
And it's so fascinating because it blended elements of Taoism, legalism, even Confucianism. Let's talk about a philosophical melting pot.
Wait, legalism?
Yeah.
Isn't that like all about strict laws and punishments?
Right.
It seems pretty far from the Taoist emphasis on spontaneity and naturalness.
It does seem contradictory on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But Huanglao thought was all about finding a balance, a way to harmonize those seemingly opposite ideas. And they believed that a wise ruler, a sage king, could embody the Tao and govern effectively using a combination of wisdom, virtue, and even laws when necessary.
So they saw a role for both, like individual cultivation and effective governance. It's like they were trying to bridge the gap between the inner world of the individual and the outer world of politics and society.
Exactly. They also incorporated ideas about cosmology, divination, even immortality practices.
Wow.
It was a truly holistic system, attempting to encompass all aspects of human experience and the cosmos. And these ideas had a huge impact on early Taoist thought, particularly the Tao Te Ching.
Okay, so we've got this Huanglao school potentially influencing the Tao Te Ching. What about the Zhuangzi?
Yeah.
What clues do we have about the community that might have shaped that text?
Most scholars agree that the inner chapters of the Zhuangzi, the ones that are considered the most philosophically complex and sophisticated, were likely written by Zhuangzi himself, but the outer chapters, with their wider array of stories and dialogues, ideas, those were probably added later by his students and followers.
So the Zhuangzi is like this garden, where Zhuangzi kind of planted the seeds, and then his students came along and cultivated those seeds, adding their own flowers and trees to create this like rich and diverse landscape.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of influences, remember Hui Shi, the master of paradox?
Of course.
He was a close friend and philosophical sparring partner of Zhuangzi.
Oh, wow.
And they would engage in these lively debates, pushing each other to refine their ideas and explore the limits of language and logic.
I can imagine these two philosophical titans trading barbs and insights, challenging each other to see the world from these ever more nuanced perspectives. Makes me wish I could have been a fly on the wall.
It would have been quite a sight.
In one of those ancient philosophical salons.
Their dialogues captured in the Zhuangzi are still such a source of inspiration for philosophers today.
Yeah.
They remind us that the best way to sharpen our minds is to engage in, rigorous and playful debate with other brilliant thinkers.
So we've got these two amazing texts, the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi, shaped by these communities of thinkers who are wrestling with some pretty big questions about reality, language, and the Tao. But I'm curious, how did these texts come together?
Right.
When did they become the essential texts of Taoism?
That's another mystery that scholars are still trying to piece together. But it seems that the association of Laozi with the Tao Te Ching might have happened later. Perhaps even as a way to boost the credibility of Taoist ideas in a world that was dominated by Confucianism.
So it's like they were saying, hey, look, even Confucius himself had a teacher, and that teacher was Laozi, the author of this profound text, the Tao Te Ching.
Right.
It's a brilliant strategy. Connect your ideas to a respected authority figure. Suddenly they carry a lot more weight.
It was a way to establish a lineage, a connection to the past, and it really helped solidify the position of Taoism within, the intellectual landscape of ancient China.
It just goes to show how ideas travel through time, adapting, evolving, acquiring these new layers of meaning along the way. It makes me appreciate how much context matters
Yeah.
when we're trying to understand philosophical ideas.
It does, and I think the story of Taoism is a beautiful example of that ongoing evolution
Yeah.
from its roots in ancient China to its influence on later schools of thought like Neo-Daoism and Zen Buddhism.
Yeah.
Taoism has continued to inspire and provoke thinkers for centuries.
Speaking of Neo-Daoism, I'm eager to learn more about this later chapter in the Taoist story.
Yes.
It seems like this fascinating blend of Taoism and Confucianism with a dash of Buddhism thrown in for good measure.
I think Neo-Taoism is a testament to the enduring power of Taoist thought
Okay.
and its ability to adapt to new contexts. Imagine China centuries after the classical period.
Okay.
The Han Dynasty has fallen, and there's this sense of disillusionment with the old ways of thinking.
Okay.
Confucianism, which had been dominant for so long,
Right.
no longer seemed to offer all the answers.
So it's a time of upheaval and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
People are searching for new ways of making sense of the world. It's ripe for a philosophical shakeup.
Exactly, and that's where Neo-Taoism enters the scene. It's this revival of Taoist thought, but it's not a simple return to the past.
Okay.
Neo-Taoism is deeply influenced by the intervening centuries, particularly the rise of Confucianism and the arrival of Buddhism from India.
So it's more of a fusion, a blending of different traditions to create something new.
Yeah, it's like taking the classic Taoist ingredients and adding some new spices to create a more complex and nuanced flavor profile.
I love that analogy.
And the key figures in Neo-Taoism, Wang Bi and Guosheng,
All right.
were both avowed Confucians.
Wow.
And they didn't see Taoism and Confucianism as mutually exclusive, but rather as complementary paths to wisdom.
So they were trying to find, like, a middle ground, a way to integrate the insights of both traditions. What did that look like in practice?
Well, they believed that by cultivating our inner day, our virtue and wisdom, we could also become more effective in the world, better able to fulfill our social roles and contribute to the common good.
Okay.
So they saw this harmony between inner cultivation and outer action.
So it's like they were saying, you can be a sage on the inside and a king on the outside. It's a vision of integrated living that's still incredibly relevant today. We often think of these things as separate.
Right.
Personal growth versus worldly success. But Neo-Taoism suggests that they can be two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And their ideas had a profound impact on Chinese thought, influencing not only later developments in Taoism, but also Confucianism and even Buddhism.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating blend of Taoist and Confucian ideas in Neo-Taoism. But what were some of the specific philosophical concepts that emerged from this movement? What were they grappling with?
One of the central themes of Neo-Taoism was this concept of non-being as the ground of being.
Okay.
This idea is rooted in passages from the Tao Jing that speak of Wu or non-being as the source of all things.
Hold on. Non-being is the source of being.
Yeah.
That sounds like a real head-scratcher. How can something that doesn't exist be the origin of everything that does exist?
It is a paradox.
It seems counterintuitive.
And it's one that Neo-Taoist thinkers spent a lot of time trying to unpack.
Okay.
Wang Bi, for example, argued that non-being was the ultimate reality,
Right.
the underlying ground from which all things emerge, like ripples on the surface of a pond.
So he's suggesting that beneath the surface of all the things we see and experience, there's this fundamental emptiness, a void, that's actually the source of everything.
Exactly. And he connected this idea to the Taiji, the great ultimate from the I Ching, the Book of Changes.
Okay.
The Taiji represents that primordial unity,
Okay.
the undifferentiated wholeness that precedes all duality and multiplicity.
So the Taiji is like the cosmic egg, containing all the potential for everything that will ever exist.
Yeah.
And it's from this state of pure potentiality, this non-being, that the world as we know it arises.
Yes, and this wasn't just an abstract metaphysical concept for Neo-Taoists.
Okay.
Understanding this relationship between being and non-being was a way to cultivate a deeper understanding of the nature of reality and to live in greater harmony with the Tao.
So it's about recognizing the emptiness, the void, at the heart of existence, and finding peace and equanimity in the face of change and impermanence.
Beautifully put, it's about recognizing that even our sense of self, our ego, is a temporary construct.
Wow.
That arises from this ground of non-being.
That's a pretty radical idea that challenges so much of our Western thinking about the self as like a solid independent entity.
It does.
So Neo-Taoism is not just about blending Taoism and Confucianism. It's also about exploring these deep metaphysical questions about the nature of reality and the self.
It is, and it's a testament to the richness and depth of Taoist thought, its ability to engage with both practical and philosophical questions, to offer insights into both the mundane and the profound.
And speaking of profound, I think we need to address the elephant in the room, the arrival of Buddhism in China.
Right.
This seems like such a pivotal moment, the meeting of these two great philosophical and spiritual traditions. I'm really curious how Taoism responded to this new kid on the block.
The meeting of Taoism and Buddhism is a fascinating chapter in the history of ideas. At first, there was some resistance. Buddhist ideas were seen as foreign, even alien to the Chinese way of thinking.
Right.
But as Buddhism began to take root in China, Taoist thinkers began to engage with these new ideas,
Okay.
finding both points of conflict and points of convergence.
So it's like two rivers meeting, sometimes falling together, sometimes clashing, but always influencing each other's course.
Exactly. What were some of those key points of both conflict and convergence?
Yeah.
Well, one area of conflict was the Buddhist emphasis on the illusory nature of the self.
Okay.
And this clashed with that Confucian ideal of the cultivated self, which was central to Neo-Taoist thought.
Okay.
But there were also many areas of overlap,
Right.
particularly in terms of the emphasis on meditation, mindfulness, and living in harmony with nature.
So it's like they were both pointing towards a similar goal, a state of liberation from suffering, and a life lived in accordance with the ultimate reality. But they were just approaching it from different angles.
Exactly. And Neo-Taoism played a key role in bridging those two traditions.
Okay.
Remember, Neo-Taoist thinkers had already been grappling with questions about the nature of reality, the self, the ultimate ground of being. So they were well equipped to engage with Buddhist philosophy and to find common ground.
So they were like the translators, the interpreters, who helped to make sense of these new Buddhist ideas in a way that Chinese intellectuals could understand.
Yes, and in doing so, they also transformed both Taoism and Buddhism, creating these new hybrid forms of thought that were uniquely Chinese.
And one of the most striking examples of this fusion of Taoism and Buddhism is Zen Buddhism, right?
Absolutely.
It seems like Zen really embodies this blend of Eastern thought.
Zen, or Chan in Chinese, emerged from this fertile ground of Taoist and Buddhist thought. It embraced that Taoist emphasis on intuition, spontaneity, and living in the present moment, while also incorporating Buddhist teachings about emptiness, impermanence, and the path to enlightenment.
So Zen is like this beautiful tapestry woven from the threads of both Taoism and Buddhism. It's a testament to the enduring power of these two great traditions and their ability to inspire and transform each other. It makes me want to learn more about Zen.
It's a fascinating tradition and one that continues to inspire people around the world.
Yeah.
But for now, I think we should bring our focus back to Taoism.
Totally.
And those core concepts that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
They're so central to understanding Taoism, and I think it's worth revisiting them in light of what we've learned about this evolution of Taoist thought.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the history of Taoism, from its ancient roots to its later developments in Neo-Taoism and its influence on Buddhism. Now let's go back to the philosophical heart of it all, those key concepts that give us a glimpse into the Taoist worldview.
And I think we should start with the granddaddy of them all, Tao itself. You know, we've translated it as way, but it's so much more than just like a path or a set of instructions.
Okay.
It's the source of all things, the underlying principle of reality, the flow of the universe. It's the ineffable, the unnameable, the mystery that lies at the heart of existence.
So Tao is like the ultimate reality, the ground of being, the force that moves all things. But if it's ineffable, how can we even talk about it?
Yeah.
It feels like a philosophical black hole, like sucking in all our attempts to grasp it.
It does defy easy definition, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the Tao Te Ching puts it this way. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. It's something we can experience, something we can intuit,
Okay.
but it's ultimately beyond the grasp of our limited minds.
So it's like trying to describe the taste of water. You can use all sorts of words and metaphors, but you can't truly convey the experience itself. You just have to drink it to know what it's like.
Exactly. And I think that experience is about aligning ourselves with the natural flow of the universe. It's about letting go of our rigid beliefs.
Okay.
And surrendering to the mystery of existence.
So trusting the process, letting go of the need to control, and finding harmony with the Tao.
Yes, and recognizing that we're not separate from this flow, but rather a part of it. It's about surrendering to something larger than ourselves, something that we can't fully comprehend, but can only experience.
And that surrender can be both liberating and terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
It requires a certain amount of courage and humility to let go of our ego's need to, like, grasp and control.
It does.
Okay, so we've got Deo, this ultimate mystery, but how does this translate into a way of life?
Right.
How do we actually embody the day in our daily lives?
Yeah.
That's what I'm really struggling with.
And that's where the concept of day comes in. You know, it's often translated as virtue or power, but it's really more about aligning ourselves with the day, cultivating those qualities that allow us to flow effortlessly with the natural order of things.
So if Deo is the source, day is like the expression of that source.
Mm-hmm.
It's how the Tao manifests in the world, our thoughts, actions, interactions.
Precisely. And day is something we can cultivate within ourselves through practices like meditation, mindfulness, and living in harmony with nature.
So it's about developing our inner strength, our wisdom, our compassion, our ability to act in accordance with the Tao, becoming more aligned with that, like, underlying flow of reality.
Yes, and it's a process of constant refinement.
Okay.
Stripping away the layers of ego and conditioning that obscure our true nature. It's about becoming more fully who we are meant to be,
Right.
not who society tells us to be.
This is starting to make sense.
Good.
But I have to admit, I'm still wrestling with the concept of wu-wei. We talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
But I'm still not quite grasping it. It's often translated as non-action. But you said that's a misinterpretation, so what is it really about?
Wu-wei is one of those concepts that seems to slip through your fingers the more you try to grasp it. It's a central paradox of Taoist practice. And it's not about passivity or inaction. It's about acting in a way that's effortless, spontaneous, and in harmony with the Tao.
So it's not about forcing things or trying to control outcomes, but about aligning our actions with that natural flow of the Tao and allowing things to unfold as they will. But doesn't that seem a little passive? How do we reconcile that with the need to, like, take action in the world?
That's the paradox.
Okay.
It's not about being passive, but it's about finding that sweet spot where action flows effortlessly.
Okay.
Where we're not imposing our will on the world, but rather responding to the world in a way that's both skillful and natural.
So finding that balance between effort and effortlessness, between conscious action and intuitive knowing. It sounds like it requires a deep level of trust in the Tao, a willingness to surrender to the unknown.
Exactly, and it's a lifelong journey, a process of constant refinement and attunement to the Tao.
Okay, so we've got Tao, Day, and Wu Wei. These are some pretty heady concepts. But I appreciate how they challenge us to think differently about our relationship to the world, to ourselves, and to each other. It's like Taoism is offering this different lens through which to view reality, one that's more fluid, more interconnected, less focused on control and domination.
You're getting it, and that brings us to this question of how Taoism views language and the power of words. You know, we touched on this earlier with hui shi, but I think it's worth revisiting in the context of these core concepts.
Yeah, language seems to be like this recurring theme in Taoist thought. It's like they're both acknowledging its power, but also warning us about its limitations.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of iming, meaning name, comes into play.
Okay.
Taoism recognizes the power of language to both illuminate and obscure.
Right.
To both connect and divide. It's a double-edged sword that we need to use carefully.
So on the one hand, language allows us to communicate, share ideas, create meaning. But on the other hand, it can also trap us in these rigid categories, create divisions, and lead to misunderstanding and conflict.
Precisely. Words are tools. And like any tool, they can be used for good or ill. Taoism encourages us to be mindful of the words we use, both internally and externally, and to recognize that they can never fully capture the complexity of reality.
So using language skillfully, with awareness and compassion, recognizing its limitations, but also appreciating its power.
Yes, and it's about cultivating an inner stillness.
Okay.
You know, a space of silence within ourselves where we can listen deeply and speak authentically.
Okay, so we've got Tao, Day, Wu Wei, and Ming. And there's one more concept that we haven't touched on yet, chain, which means constant or unchanging. This seems a bit more straightforward than some of the other concepts we've been wrestling with.
It might seem straightforward, but it also has this paradoxical dimension.
Okay.
In Taoism, Chang is often used to describe the Tao itself.
Okay.
The Tao is the only thing that's truly constant, that unchanging ground of being.
All right.
But paradoxically, the Tao is also the source of all change.
Okay.
It's like that still point at the center of a wheel, the unchanging ground from which all movement arises.
Okay, my head is spinning again. How can something be both unchanging and the source of change?
It's another one of those Taoist paradoxes that invites us to think beyond our usual categories of thought. It's about recognizing that change and constancy are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
Everything in the world is in this constant state of flux.
Right.
But that flux is ultimately grounded in the unchanging reality of the Tao.
So Taoism is about recognizing both the constancy of the Tao and the ever-changing nature of the world around us. It's about finding that balance between stability and change, between acceptance and action.
Beautifully put. It's about learning to dance with the rhythm of the universe, embracing the flow of life, while also recognizing that underlying stillness at the heart of it all.
It's a beautiful vision, but also a challenging one in our modern world, with its emphasis on speed and efficiency and control. It's easy to feel like we're constantly trying to swim upstream against the current of the Tao.
It's true, but I think Taoism reminds us that there's another way. And it's not about conquering nature, but about aligning ourselves with its rhythms, finding that sweet spot where effort and effortlessness meet, where action flows naturally from a place of deep inner harmony.
Okay, so we've revisited these 5 key concepts: Tao, Te, Wu Wei, Ming, and Chang. And I have to say, they're really starting to sink in now.
Good.
It's like they're pieces of a puzzle that are slowly coming together to reveal this more holistic and interconnected picture of reality.
And as we move into the final part of our exploration, I think it's important to consider how these concepts can be applied to our lives today.
Yeah, like how can we integrate these ancient Taoist insights into our modern world? What wisdom can we glean from these teachings that can help us navigate the complexities of 21st century life?
Exactly.
It's funny, we've been diving deep into the philosophy of Taoism, exploring these incredibly abstract concepts.
Right.
But I keep coming back to this sense of practicality.
Yeah.
It's like Taoism isn't just about thinking differently. It's about living differently.
That's a key insight. Taoism isn't just a system of thought, it's a way of being in the world. And I think that's what makes it so relevant today. In a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming, I think Taoism offers this path to greater peace and harmony and fulfillment.
So where do we start?
Yeah.
How do we take these abstract concepts like Tao, Te, and Wu Wei and apply them to our everyday lives?
Yeah.
It feels like a big leap from ancient Chinese philosophy to modern living.
It doesn't have to be a leap.
No.
Taoism is filled with practical wisdom that we can draw upon.
Okay.
Remember the concept of Wu Wei, acting without artificial purpose.
Yeah.
In our modern context, that might mean questioning our constant striving, our obsession with productivity and achievement. It's about asking ourselves, what truly matters?
Yeah.
What brings me joy and a sense of purpose?
It's like Taoism is encouraging us to step off the treadmill of modern life, to pause and reflect on what's truly important.
Yeah, instead of constantly chasing after these external goals, maybe it's about cultivating a deeper connection with our inner selves, with nature, with the present moment.
And that's where Taoist practices can be really helpful. Practices like meditation, mindfulness, and Tai Chi can help us cultivate that sense of inner peace and harmony, which then kind of ripples outward into our interactions with the world. I've always been intrigued by Tai Chi. It's like a moving meditation. This beautiful blend of physical movement and mental focus. It seems to embody that Taoist principle of effortless action, moving with the flow of energy.
It does. Tai Chi is a wonderful example of how Taoist principles can be embodied.
Yeah.
And even simple things like spending time in nature can be so deeply nourishing and can help us reconnect with the Tao.
I think a lot of people today are yearning for that connection with nature. We spend so much time indoors, glued to our screens, that we've lost touch with the natural world.
Right.
And Taoism seems to offer a way back to that connection, a way to realign ourselves with the rhythms of nature.
It does. Remember, Taoism sees humans as an integral part of nature, not separate from it.
Right.
And I think when we lose that connection with nature, we lose touch with a part of ourselves.
So it's not just about environmentalism.
Mm.
It's about recognizing that our own well-being is intertwined with the well-being of the natural world.
Mm.
It's about seeing ourselves as part of this larger ecosystem, like this web of interconnected life.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that Taoist principle of Da, cultivating our inner virtue and wisdom.
Right.
When we live in accordance with the Tao, when we cultivate our Tao, we naturally act in ways that are beneficial to ourselves and to the world around us.
So it's not about following a set of rules or dogmas, but it's about cultivating this way of being that naturally leads to right action.
Beautifully put, it's about aligning our actions with the Tao, with the flow of nature, with the deepest wisdom of our own hearts.
That's beautiful.
Taoism is so relevant today. It's not about imposing this rigid set of beliefs,
Right.
but about offering a path to greater understanding, compassion, and wisdom. It's an invitation to live this more harmonious and fulfilling life, both for ourselves and for the world.
I have to say, this deep dive into Taoism has really shifted my perspective. It's made me realize that there's another way of being in the world, a way that's less about striving and controlling, and more about surrendering and flowing. It's about trusting the wisdom of nature, cultivating our inner virtue, and acting with effortless grace.
And it's a journey that's available to all of us, regardless of our background or beliefs. Taoism reminds us that the answers we seek are often found not in these grand pronouncements or rigid doctrines, but in the quiet stillness of our own hearts, in the natural beauty of the world around us, in the simple act of being present in this moment.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into Taoism, I want to thank you, our listener, for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we have. And we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, to find your own way of embodying the Tao in your life.
May your path be filled with wonder, wisdom, and the boundless grace of the Tao.